The doors to the trauma bay flew open. A top-tier surgeon looked down his nose at the woman desperately compressing a dying patient's chest. "Step away from him. You're just a nurse," he sneered. He had absolutely no idea the woman he just insulted was a decorated battlefield hero until a 4-star general arrived to bring the entire hospital to a standstill. The fluorescent lights of Emory University Hospital's emergency department flickered with a sterile, unforgiving hum. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta, the kind of sweltering summer day where the humidity outside seemed to drive people to the brink of madness, inevitably spilling over into the ER. Margaret Hayes, known to the staff simply as Maggie, moved through the organized chaos with the terrifying calm of someone who had seen much worse. Dressed in standard-issue royal blue scrubs, her auburn hair pulled back into a tight, utilitarian bun, she looked like any other registered nurse on the floor. There was nothing on her badge to indicate that before she was taking vitals in a civilian hospital, she was Captain Margaret Hayes, a trauma specialist attached to a Joint Special Operations Command forward surgical team. She had spent tours in the dust-choked valleys of Kandahar and the blood-soaked triage tents outside Fallujah. She had pulled men from burning Humvees and held arteries closed with her bare hands while mortars shook the earth. Here, however, she was just Maggie, and to Dr. Harrison Caldwell, she was barely even that. Dr. Caldwell was the hospital's golden boy, the newly appointed chief of cardiothoracic surgery. He wore his pedigree, Harvard Medical School, a residency at Johns Hopkins, and a fellowship at the Mayo Clinic like a crown. Caldwell was brilliant, precise, and utterly insufferable. He viewed the hospital as his personal kingdom and the nursing staff as an unfortunate, necessary cast of servants whose sole purpose was to hand him instruments and absorb his temper tantrums. "Nurse Hayes," Caldwell's voice sliced through the chatter at the nurse's station. He didn't look up from the tablet in his hand. "The post-op chart for bed 4 is incomplete. The fluid outputs haven't been updated in 15 minutes. Maggie didn't flinch. She finished entering a dosage into the computerized dispensary before turning to him. "Bed 4's catheter was compromised, doctor. I replaced it, stabilized the patient's heart rate, and I am inputting the new baseline metrics right now." Caldwell finally looked up, his pale blue eyes narrowing. He smoothed the lapels of his custom-tailored white coat, which he wore over a perfectly pressed dress shirt. "I don't need a play-by-play of your plumbing duties, Hayes. I need the numbers. When I ask for a chart, I expect it to be ready. Do I need to remind you of the hierarchy here?" "No, Dr. Caldwell," Maggie said evenly. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "The numbers are in the system now," Caldwell scoffed, turning on his heel. "See that you keep up. We are running a world-class facility here, not a roadside clinic." As he walked away, a younger nurse, Brienne, leaned over the counter. "I swear, one of these days someone is going to key his Porsche. How do you stay so calm when he talks to you like that?" Maggie offered a faint, tight-lipped smile. "When you've had a warlord scream in your face while you're trying to save his son's life, a guy in a bow tie complaining about a chart doesn't really register." Brienne blinked, unsure if Maggie was joking. Maggie never elaborated on her past. Her HR file merely stated she had served in the U.S. Army Medical Corps before transitioning to civilian life. She had sought out the anonymity of a busy civilian ER specifically to leave the war behind. She wanted the rhythm of normal life, broken bones, appendectomies, and the occasional car accident. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Suddenly, the red emergency phone on the central desk blared. The charge nurse snatched it up, listened for 3 seconds, and slammed it down. "Mass casualty alert. Multi-vehicle pileup on I-285, 2 semis and a passenger bus. EMS is 3 minutes out. All hands on deck. Trauma bays 1 through 4, clear them out now." The mundane rhythm of the ER shattered. Maggie's demeanor instantly shifted. The polite, quiet nurse vanished, replaced by the battle-hardened officer. Her movements became terrifyingly precise. She began prepping Trauma Bay 3, laying out intubation kits, chest tubes, and massive transfusion protocols with muscle memory forged in a war zone. The automatic doors slid open, and the wail of ambulance sirens flooded the bay. Paramedics rushed in, pushing gurneys stained with fresh blood. "John Doe, mid-30s, a paramedic shouted, pushing a violently thrashing patient toward Maggie's bay. "Crushed between the bus and the steering column. Vitals are crashing. BP is 70/40. Heart rate 140. saturating at 85% on high-flow oxygen. Maggie was at the head of the bed before the gurney even locked into place. She took one look at the patient. His face was cyanotic, turning a terrifying shade of blue-gray. His chest was expanding unevenly, the right side completely rigid. The veins in his neck were distended, bulging like thick blue cords against his skin. Tracheal deviation, jugular venous distension, unilateral chest expansion. Maggie's mind ticked through the symptoms in milliseconds. Massive tension pneumothorax. Air is trapped in the chest cavity, crushing his heart and remaining lung. He needs a needle decompression. Right now, Maggie announced, her voice cutting through the noise with absolute authority. She reached for a 1/4 gauge angiocatheter, the standard tool to puncture the chest wall and release the trapped air. "Hold it right there," a sharp voice barked. Dr. Harrison Caldwell strode into the trauma bay, having been paged for the mass casualty event. He shoved his way past the paramedics, barely glancing at the patient's distended neck veins. He looked at the monitor, seeing the rapid, weak heartbeat. He's in hemorrhagic shock. Massive internal bleeding from the crush injury, Caldwell declared rapidly. "Nurse, put down that needle. He needs 2 large-bore IVs, O-negative blood pushed immediately, and prep him for an emergency thoracotomy. We're opening his chest." Maggie stood her ground. "Doctor, look at his neck. Look at his trachea. It's deviating to the left. He has a tension pneumothorax. If you don't decompress his chest before you push fluids or try to open him up, his heart will arrest in less than 60 seconds. Caldwell's face flushed crimson. To be corrected in front of an entire trauma team was a cardinal sin in his world. I do not need a diagnostic lecture from a nurse. His blood pressure is tanking because he is bleeding out. Step away from the patient, Hayes. Now. Maggie looked at the monitor. The oxygen saturation dropped to 78%. The patient's thrashing weakened into a terrifying limp gasp for air. Time had run out. "Step away. You're just a nurse," Caldwell snarled, reaching across the bed to physically push Maggie's shoulder aside. It was a mistake. Maggie didn't yield an inch. Instead, her hand shot out, her grip like a steel vise clamping around Caldwell's wrist. She didn't squeeze to hurt, but the sheer, immovable force of her grip made the surgeon freeze in shock. "If we wait for a surgical tray, he dies," Maggie said, her voice dropping an octave, possessing a chilling, absolute certainty. "If you push blood into a heart that is being crushed by atmospheric pressure, he dies." Before Caldwell could recover his wits to scream at her, Maggie released his wrist, pivoted, and drove the 3, 2, 5 inch, 1, 4 gauge needle directly into the second intercostal space on the patient's right midclavicular line. HSSSSS. The sound of trapped, high-pressure air escaping the pleural cavity was loud and distinct, like a punctured tire. Instantly, the tension in the room snapped. The patient took a deep, agonizing but life-saving gasp of air. On the monitor, the oxygen saturation numbers began to climb rapidly. 82%, 88%, 94%. The heart rate slowed from a frantic 140 to a manageable 105. The distended veins in his neck visibly receded as the pressure came off his vena cava, allowing blood to finally return to his heart. The trauma bay was dead silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the newly stabilized heart monitor. The paramedics stared at Maggie in awe. She had just saved the man's life with a $3 piece of plastic and metal, defying the chief of surgery to his face. Maggie calmly secured the catheter with medical tape, turning her attention back to the monitor. "Patient is stabilized, ready for a formal chest tube insertion, doctor." She said it without a hint of smugness or defiance. It was a simple statement of fact, but to Dr. Harrison Caldwell, it was an act of high treason. His face went from crimson to a dangerous mottled white. His hands trembled, not from adrenaline, but from pure, unadulterated rage. He stepped uncomfortably close to Maggie, his voice a venomous hiss. "You are done," he spat. "You are finished in this hospital. You just assaulted a superior and performed an unauthorized, invasive medical procedure outside your scope of practice. I am going to have your license revoked, and I am going to see to it that you never work in medicine again." Maggie looked him dead in the eye. "I saved his life, and you know it." "Security!" Caldwell roared, spinning around to face the crowded hallway. "Get security in here. I want this woman removed from my trauma bay. Two security guards jogging past the room stopped, looking confused. They approached hesitantly. Doctor, we have a mass casualty situation, Maggie started, motioning to the chaos outside the room. You are relieved of duty, Nurse Hayes, Caldwell interrupted, his voice echoing off the tile walls. Escort her to the administrative wing immediately. Lock her out of the dispensary system. Knowing that fighting him right now would only disrupt the care of the other patients flooding into the ER, Maggie took a slow, deep breath. She unclipped her stethoscope from her neck, placed it gently on the counter, and walked out of the trauma bay, flanked by the bewildered security guards. An hour later, Maggie sat in a plush leather chair in the antechamber of the hospital's executive boardroom. The contrast between the pristine, mahogany-paneled administrative wing and the blood-soaked ER below was stark. Here, the air smelled of expensive coffee and floor wax. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see Caldwell pacing furiously, gesturing wildly as he spoke to Evelyn Ross, the hospital's chief administrator. Evelyn looked stressed, massaging her temples. What Caldwell and Evelyn didn't know was that today was not just any Tuesday at Emory University Hospital. For the past 6 months, the hospital administration had been lobbying heavily for a massive, multi-million-dollar Department of Defense grant to establish Emory as a premier training ground for military trauma surgeons. The final stage of the approval process was a site visit from the Pentagon's top medical liaison and the chairman of the Armed Services Medical Committee. They were expecting a VIP. They were expecting General Robert Mitchell. General Mitchell, known in the Pentagon as Iron Bob, was a legendary figure. A 4-star general who had commanded forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, he was known for his ruthless efficiency, his utter disdain for bureaucracy, and his fierce loyalty to the troops who served under him. He was currently touring the facility with an entourage of military aides, hospital board members, and a flurry of nervous PR executives. Inside the glass conference room, the door opened. Evelyn Ross signaled for Maggie to enter. Maggie walked in, standing at parade rest, hands clasped behind her back, feet shoulder-width apart. It was an unconscious habit, a remnant of her past life. "Have a seat, Miss Hayes," Evelyn said tiredly. "I prefer to stand, ma'am," Maggie replied. Caldwell sneered. "Playing the martyr won't save you. Evelyn, I want her terminated immediately. Gross insubordination, operating outside her licensure, and physical assault." She grabbed my arm. Evelyn sighed, looking at the file on her desk. "Maggie, you have an exemplary record here, but Dr. Caldwell's allegations are severe. Bypassing a physician's direct order and performing a needle thoracostomy is technically a violation of nursing protocol in this facility, regardless of the patient's outcome. With all due respect, Administrator Ross," Maggie said, her voice calm and unwavering, "the protocol dictates that a physician must be present and capable of intervening. Dr. Caldwell misdiagnosed a tension pneumothorax as hypovolemic shock. If I had followed his order, the patient would be in the morgue right now." "That is a lie," Caldwell shouted, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. "It was a complex presentation. I was gathering data. You acted like a cowboy, some glorified medic playing doctor. You are just a nurse. You don't have the training, the education, or the authority to make that call." Maggie's eyes hardened. The phrase "just a nurse" echoed in her mind. She thought of the dust storms in Helmand Province. She thought of the time she performed an emergency cricothyrotomy on a 19-year-old Marine while under heavy mortar fire, using the light of a single glow stick. "I have the training," Maggie said softly, dangerously. Before Caldwell could launch into another tirade, a commotion erupted outside the glass walls of the boardroom. A wave of nervous hospital executives in expensive suits was practically sprinting down the hallway, attempting to keep pace with a group of tall, imposing men in perfectly pressed army dress uniforms. At the center of the group was a man with iron gray hair, a chest heavy with ribbons, and 4 shining silver stars on his epaulets. General Robert Mitchell had arrived on the executive floor. The entourage stopped right outside the boardroom. The hospital's CEO, sweating profusely, was pointing out the various administrative offices, trying to impress the general. Inside the room, Caldwell smirked, puffing out his chest. "There is the DoD delegation. This hospital is about to receive a $50 million grant. Hayes, we are stepping up to the major leagues." We can't afford to have reckless, insubordinate liabilities like you on the payroll when we are dealing with the United States military. General Mitchell, looking profoundly bored with the CEO's tour, glanced through the glass walls of the conference room. His gaze swept over Evelyn Ross, dismissed Caldwell in a fraction of a second, and finally landed on the woman standing at parade rest in blue scrubs. The general stopped dead in his tracks. The entire entourage piled up behind him, executives bumping into military aides like a derailed train. General Mitchell squinted, stepping closer to the glass. His stern, weathered face transformed, breaking into an expression of absolute shock. He ignored the CEO mid-sentence, reached out, and pushed open the heavy oak door of the boardroom. The room fell dead silent as the four-star general stepped inside, his polished shoes echoing on the hardwood floor. Caldwell immediately straightened up, his anger evaporating into sycophantic eagerness. He quickly stepped forward, extending his hand. "General Mitchell! What an honor! I am Dr. Harrison Caldwell, Chief of Surgery. We are just dealing with a minor internal HR issue. Please, excuse the interruption." General Mitchell completely ignored Caldwell's outstretched hand. He walked right past the Chief of Surgery, his eyes locked entirely on Maggie. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. The silence in the room was deafening. The hospital CEO, Evelyn Ross, and Dr. Caldwell watched in utter bewilderment. General Robert Mitchell, a man who answered only to the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States, snapped his heels together with a sharp crack. Slowly, with absolute precision and profound respect, he raised his right hand and delivered a perfect, crisp salute to the ER nurse in blue scrubs. "Captain Hayes," the general's deep voice rumbled through the room, heavy with emotion. "It is an honor to finally find you." The silence in the boardroom stretched, tight and brittle, like a guitar string pulled just a fraction of an inch past its breaking point. Dr. Harrison Caldwell's hand hung in the empty space between him and the four-star general, a physical manifestation of his suddenly irrelevant existence. Evelyn Ross, the chief administrator, stood up so quickly, her heavy mahogany chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood. The hospital CEO, standing just outside the door with the rest of the military entourage, looked as though he had swallowed a live grenade. Maggie's posture remained rigidly perfect, though a faint, unexpected warmth flickered in her chest. She slowly raised her right hand, returning the salute with the crisp, snapping precision of a seasoned combat veteran. "Sir, it has been a long time, General Mitchell." Mitchell dropped his hand, a warm, fiercely proud smile breaking through the weathered lines of his face. He reached forward and grasped both of her shoulders, a deeply personal gesture that made the executives gasp. "Not long enough to forget, Captain. I've had my aides looking for you for 2 years. When you quietly resigned your commission and dropped off the grid, my office practically turned the eastern seaboard upside down." Caldwell finally found his voice, though it sounded thin, reedy, and stripped of its usual booming authority. "General Mitchell, there must be some kind of misunderstanding. This woman is a registered nurse on my floor. She's currently under disciplinary review for insubordination, and..." General Mitchell slowly turned his head. The warmth completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, predatory stare that had made hardened insurgents confess state secrets. He looked at Caldwell as if the chief of surgery were a particularly unpleasant stain on the rug. "Dr. Caldwell, is it?" Mitchell's voice was dangerously low, a rumbling thunder before a strike. "I do not know what petty bureaucratic kingdom you think you rule inside these walls, but you are currently speaking about Captain Margaret Hayes, 2-time recipient of the Bronze Star, recipient of the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry under fire." Evelyn Ross covered her mouth. The hospital CEO gripped the doorframe to keep himself upright. Mitchell took a step toward Caldwell, forcing the arrogant surgeon to instinctively step back. 3 years ago, my son, First Lieutenant James Mitchell, was leading a convoy through the Korengal Valley. They were ambushed. An improvised explosive device ripped his Humvee apart. James sustained a catastrophic femoral artery sever and a bilateral chest trauma. The general's voice thickened with emotion, but his posture remained like iron. He pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at Maggie. That woman right there was the only surgical asset within 60 miles. She rode a Black Hawk helicopter into a hot landing zone, taking heavy RPG fire. She rappelled down to the wreckage. For 2 hours, while taking active sniper fire, Captain Hayes held my son's artery closed with her bare left hand while performing a field chest tube insertion with her right. She kept him and 3 other men alive until medevac could secure the perimeter. Mitchell stepped closer to Caldwell, invading his personal space. She has saved more lives in the mud and the blood than you will ever see in your pristine, climate-controlled operating rooms. So, doctor, you will forgive me if I find your disciplinary review to be the most spectacular display of utter idiocy I have witnessed in my 40 years of service. Caldwell's face had drained of all color, leaving him looking sickly and gray. I didn't know. Her file only said standard medical corps. But General, with all due respect, military commendations do not excuse civilian malpractice. She bypassed my direct medical order today. The patient was crashing from hypovolemic shock. She performed a rogue needle decompression. Ah, Mitchell said, his eyes narrowing sharply. He turned to the entourage crowded in the hallway. Colonel Ford, get in here. A tall, incredibly sharp-looking military doctor, wearing the insignia of a full-bird colonel, stepped into the room. Colonel William Ford was the Pentagon's chief medical liaison, the man directly responsible for evaluating Emory's trauma center for the $50 million grant. Sir, Colonel Ford said, snapping to attention. Colonel, you were reviewing the telemetry data from the mass casualty event on the first floor when I came up here, were you not? Mitchell asked. I was, sir. I pulled the real-time feeds from the trauma bays to evaluate the staff's initial triage response, Ford replied, looking directly at Caldwell with an expression of clinical disgust. And what did the data on the patient in Bay 3 indicate? Mitchell pressed. Colonel Ford opened a sleek, black tablet. Patient presented with a heart rate of 140, plummeting blood pressure, and a rapidly dropping oxygen saturation. But most importantly, the telemetry clearly showed extreme jugular venous distension and tracheal deviation. A textbook, undeniable presentation of a massive tension pneumothorax. Caldwell opened his mouth to speak, but Ford cut him off with a raised hand. Dr. Caldwell ordered a massive fluid push and prepped for a thoracotomy, Ford continued, his voice echoing with absolute condemnation. Had those orders been carried out, the sudden influx of fluids, combined with the atmospheric pressure crushing the heart, would have caused irreversible cardiac arrest within 60 seconds. The patient would be dead. Evelyn Ross let out a sharp gasp, her eyes wide with horror as she looked at Caldwell. Captain Hayes intervened, Ford concluded, turning off the tablet. She performed a flawless, life-saving needle thoracostomy. The data shows immediate stabilization. The patient is currently resting comfortably in the ICU, awaiting a standard chest tube. Captain Hayes did not commit malpractice. She prevented a negligent homicide. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a brilliant, arrogant career shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Caldwell looked frantically around the room, searching for an ally, a lifeline. He looked at Evelyn Ross. Evelyn, Administrator Ross, you know my record. You know my value to this hospital. This is a highly irregular interpretation of an incredibly complex trauma scenario. You cannot possibly take the word of a military liaison over your own chief of surgery. Evelyn Ross slowly stood up, smoothing the front of her skirt. Her face, previously etched with stress, was now a mask of cold, corporate resolve. She looked at General Mitchell, then at Maggie, and finally at Caldwell. Harrison, Evelyn said, her voice dripping with ice. Your value to this hospital was entirely dependent on your ability to deliver elite patient care and maintain the integrity of our surgical department. You have just been caught misdiagnosing a critical patient, attempting to cover your mistake by firing the nurse who saved his life and lying about it to the hospital administration and the United States military. Caldwell stammered, Evelyn, please, clean out your office, she said flatly. You are terminated, effective immediately. Your credentials at Emory are revoked. I will personally be reporting this incident to the State Medical Board. Security will escort you off the premises. Caldwell looked as though he had been physically struck. The golden boy of Emory Hospital, the untouchable titan of the operating room, was suddenly nothing. He opened his mouth to argue, saw the 4-star general glaring at him, and finally realized the battle was lost. He turned and practically fled the boardroom, shoving his way past the bewildered executives in the hallway. With Caldwell gone, the oppressive tension in the room finally broke. General Mitchell let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He turned back to Maggie, his expression softening into one of deep respect. Captain, Mitchell said, I didn't come to Atlanta just to tour a hospital. I came because the Department of Defense is establishing a premier national training center for military trauma surgeons. We need a civilian facility to host it, and we need a combat-tested veteran to direct the integration program. We need someone who knows the difference between textbook medicine and keeping people alive when the world is falling apart. Evelyn Ross stepped forward, a hopeful, albeit nervous, smile on her face. Maggie, Nurse Hayes, I owe you a profound apology. We failed to recognize the incredible asset we had in our own emergency department. If Emory is fortunate enough to be selected for this grant, we would be honored if you would accept the position of Director of Military Trauma Integration. You would have full autonomy, a team of your own, and a direct line to my office. Maggie looked at Evelyn, then at General Mitchell. For 2 years, she had tried to shrink herself, to hide her past, to pretend she was just a normal civilian nurse. She had tried to run from the ghosts of Kandahar by blending into the background. But looking at the general and remembering the feeling of saving that man's life in the trauma bay, she realized the truth. Her past wasn't a shadow to hide from. It was a fire that had forged her into something unbreakable. General Mitchell, Maggie said, her voice steady and clear, finally embracing the authority she had kept hidden for so long. I have one condition. Name it, Captain, Mitchell smiled. When the new military residents arrive, she said, a faint, knowing smirk playing on her lips, they spend their first 2 weeks taking orders from the nursing staff. They need to learn exactly who actually runs an emergency room. General Mitchell threw his head back and laughed, a booming, joyous sound that echoed down the halls of the administrative wing. Deal. You've got the job, Director Hayes. As Maggie walked out of the boardroom, her head held high, the executives parted to let her through. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was exactly who she was always meant to be. If you loved this incredible story of justice and heroism, make sure you hit that like button. We bring you the most dramatic, heart-pounding, real-life-inspired stories every single week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Share this video with your friends to show them what true bravery looks like, and subscribe to our channel right now to join our community. Your support helps us tell more amazing stories. Thanks for watching.
Hi, my name is Tranthan, the owner and manager of Noble Tales. After watching the video, You're Just a Nurse, the surgeon sneered. Then a 4-star general walked in to salute her. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most was the quiet strength in Maggie's character. She never seemed focused on recognition or status. She stayed focused on helping people when it mattered most. That sense of humility mixed with confidence made this story especially meaningful. One lesson I took away is that we shouldn't be too quick to judge someone based on their title or position. Have you ever been underestimated or seen someone prove others wrong in a surprising way? What moment in this story stayed with you the longest? If this story meant something to you, feel free to leave a comment and consider liking or subscribing to Noble Tales for more stories worth reflecting on.